Hey friends, and welcome to this week's episode of the U-Turn Podcast. This is your host, Ashley Stahl. I'm a counterterrorism professional turned career coach, speaker, and Forbes blogger, and I created the U-Turn Podcast because, let's face it, every now and again we realize that we're living life on autopilot and it's time to wake up and make that U-turn in your life. So prepare to go deep with some of the most transformational people I know, here to help you grow and upgrade your mindset, whether it's in work or love. Also, be sure to stick around for the end of every episode where I'm going to reflect on the conversation and offer actionable coaching insights to have a real impact on your life. In the meantime, we've opened up access to 3 free e-courses on uturnpodcast.com. So head on over there if you want to land a new job you love, find your purpose, or launch your dream business. All of these courses are totally free. All you got to do is head on over to uturnpodcast.com. That's YOUTURN podcast.com. Now let's get started with this week's guest.
We can just walk away and feel like we've got a clean slate and blame it on the person and say, oh, they didn't get me, or they weren't ready, or they're not conscious enough, or whatever bullshit story we're telling ourselves, which is truthfully just another excuse for us to stay safe and stay self-contained and self-preserved.
Hey friends, it's Ash here, and I have the treat for you of all time today, and it's Alexi Panos. She is the founder of Soul School, a monthly membership community, an incredible life coach, an author, and by the way, one of my favorite people, a friend of mine, who is always totally woke and giving me the best advice, and I thought we could talk today about how to experience true love, because Alexi has a relationship with Preston Smiles, and the two of them, if you haven't seen them on Instagram, will really inspire you and have a relationship that I think a lot of people don't, and I want to learn from it. So, Alexi, hi. Thank you.
Hi.
I'm
so happy to be here and just like chatting about this particular topic, because I feel like there's a lot of misconception about what quote unquote true love is. And I think it's time that we all just start getting radically honest about love and having real conversations about what it takes to maintain and really generate and create beautiful, loving relationships. So I can't wait.
Yes. And you know, it's so funny. I always put, especially friends of mine, I put you guys on the spot because I know how brilliant you are. And so everybody listening, it's like I just had her come up with 5 steps to experience true love in like 2 minutes. And so this is going to be, we're getting down right now. And so I'm curious though, before we even dive in, if you could share with everybody about you and Preston, how you guys found each other and what your relationship has done for both of you, because I find it to be really inspiring watching you guys together.
Awesome. Yeah, it's so crazy. Like, really, we got brought together by so many random things that had to happen and not happen. I was actually exploring dating somebody else and took a trip to London with this person who was a friend of mine for years, and ended up meeting one of his guy friends on that trip who happened to be Preston's college roommate. And this guy's like, you are the female version of this guy I went to school with in Louisiana. He lives in LA, you live in LA, you guys got to do work together because you're up to similar things. And sure enough, puts us in a Facebook message. I never respond because I'm terrible at responding on Facebook. And Preston thought I lived in London. He's like, oh, this, Vince wrote me about this chick in London, so she lives there. But sure enough, 2 weeks later, we end up at this spoken word poetry event in Venice, sitting next to each other. Because, like, that's what happens. And he's like, Alexi from London? I was like, actually, I live here. And sparks flew, and he knew right then and there that, like, this is my person. And it took me, honestly, like a good 30 days to really let my guard down enough to feel into that this was like a forever thing, because I was afraid. I was like, I don't know if I want forever right now. Like, I just moved to LA. I kind of want to be single. Like, hold on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I feel about this.
And fun fact, those of you listening, Alexi, you have a very interesting past of job role music videos and the entertainment industry.
So, yeah, there's like 9 lives that have been lived by me, and they're all very entertaining.
You know how to fucking rage is what I'm trying to say.
Pretty much. I can go there. I can definitely go there if you want to go there. But yeah, so literally, like, Preston and I, after that 30 day of like me really feeling into it, it was so obvious that I was like, you know what, I'm in. And sure enough, from that point on, we've just been like full speed ahead. We became business partners within 4 months. We moved in together in 2 months. We got engaged in like within a year, and then married within 2, and a baby the following year. So we're just like on the fast track to adulthood and doing all the things. Mm-hmm. And it has truly been the most incredible, amazing, painful, hardcore ride I've ever been on, because I've never actually allowed myself to be this committed to love and to partnership before Preston. And I think he would say the same thing. I think we're both in this for the long term, and what that requires is so much more than what's painted for us in the Disney version of life.
I love that. And I also have found it really inspiring to realize how much mentorship you both get. And I'm so curious to kind of paint a picture for everybody listening, because I know we do get that Disney picture of love, and there's a lot of expectations versus reality. And so I'm curious, like, how do you guys maintain your relationship, and what mentorship has totally changed your world?
Oh man, there's been so many, like, between amazing friends that we have that are just visions of couplehood that are older. You know, we have friends that are in their 60s and 70s. One friend in particular, this couple that's been together since they were, 20 years old, and they're in their late 60s, and they're so full of life. They go to Burning Man every year, and they're just like, they are doing it. Like, we look at them, their names are Cheryl and Sebastian, and we just like, we're in awe of them. They're truly just so present to life and life's magic and the work that's required. And they've just had some really honest and real conversations with us about what it takes. And we love that we have people like that to go to when things aren't so sparkly. And they remind us why we're here and why we chose each other. So people like that, we've got so many couples like that. And then honestly, we've done so much work on ourselves, and I can't not mention mentorship with a partnership without mentioning like the work we've done on ourselves and the coaches that we've hired, and the like literally tens of thousands of dollars in courses. Because truthfully, if you're not doing the work on yourself, you're just going to project all your shit on your partner, which, we were both proficient at that before we got in a relationship with each other. We were really good at projecting our stuff because we also knew the lingo, and we could sound really smart, and like we knew what we were talking about when we were blaming the other person, essentially. So that's the thing you got to look out for. People in coaching and therapy and all of that, like, sometimes it's hardest for us to see where our own work lies.
Spiritual bypassing, spiritual manipulation.
Yes,
like, how do you kind of paint a picture of that?
That is huge. Manipulation, because you know the language, you know how to position it, you know the other person's wounds, and you can use that as manipulation. And really, Preston and I both recognize that we were very cunning in those ways, and it required both of us getting coaches that could call us on our bullshit and call us forward. So
inspiring. And I'm really curious, when it comes down to experiencing true love, what are some of the, you said that number one was letting go of the idea of perfect. So
yes.
What do you think people are thinking when they're, because me, Alexi, I've been like single and dating all the men.
Yeah,
and I
ready
was coming.
To mingle.
I am single and having my Pringle. And
you're having, once you pop, you can't stop. So
I know. Say that. And I just literally am consistently in that place of believing that it's not about finding the right person. It's about saying no to quote unquote the wrong person so that my space is open. But I'm super curious, like, where do you think people pull the trigger too early and let go of someone, or hold on too late? Like, what are some of the things that you think people are doing that get them kind of stuck?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think there's no real hard black and white answer on that. But I will say most people that come to myself or Preston or both of us for relationship coaching and guidance around that in particular, they are looking from a place of desperation. They're looking because they're lonely. They're looking because they feel like their life's not working, and they feel like this is going to be the missing piece. So we find most people are getting into partnership and getting into relationship, making whatever guy or girl is right in front of them the person, And then getting to the point later down the road where they're like, oh, actually, maybe not. But then they're fighting for that because they'd rather have that than loneliness, or rather have that than being their own stuff. So I think recognizing that you can never attract that which is truly aligned for you if you're coming from a space of desperation is really potent and powerful. And it's one of those hard truths that sometimes it's hard to recognize within ourselves. You know, it's like, God, can I admit that I'm actually lonely and doing this from a space of I don't like my own company? Like that's a hard thing to admit to yourself. And until we do, and truthfully, that was a hard truth I had to come to when I left New York and moved to LA, because I went from serial long-term relationship to long-term relationship without ever really having a break in between. So I committed a year of my life to just dating myself and being with myself and seeing what that felt like. And it was really hard for me to admit that I didn't actually like being by myself. And so that's number one in terms of why people rush into it. And then people stay too long because of that same thing. They stay because, you know, sometimes the devil you know is harder than the devil you don't know. And a lot of people love certainty. We're obsessed with it. We're addicted to it. And even if they're certain that this is painful and this isn't working and we've tried all the things, they'd rather have that certainty than the uncertainty of maybe I'm never going to find somebody. So really like getting clear about why you're staying in it and what your intention is for being in relationship at this current time, whether you're single or considering whether or not to stay, is such a big deal. And one of the things I say to anybody who's considering a breakup or considering moving on is give yourself 90 days of 1,000% in. Like, and there's tools for this, but, you know, going back to where you were in the beginning, where you were just acknowledging all the beauty in this person, where you guys were having fun together, where you were, you know, communicating and there was less expectation and less attachment and less personalization and just like really more curiosity and more joy and more leaning in. And if you can give yourself 3 months and not feel a shift within those 3 months of honestly saying, I'm all in, then it's probably time to leave. And if after those 3 months, you're like, wow, I actually really like this person again, then it's probably a good idea to stay and continue the work.
Beautiful. And I also have found that a lot of people think that they're ready and they're not. Or I've had many men in my life that will look me in the eye and be like, I want to do this with you. And then the things that are required, you know, to align with the idea of doing it, meaning like, you know, phone calls or making time to see each other. When those things don't happen, I'm always kind of baffled. So I'm curious, like, what is up with, you know, what are your thoughts on so many people who say they're in, but they're not? What's that about?
Yeah, I think it's the disillusionment. It's this idea that, you know, I'm ready for a partnership, and somebody that I know personally comes to mind. It's a guy, he's 45. He's been saying this for the last 8 years. Like, I'm so ready for my one. And yet every person he meets, no matter how incredible they are, he finds something wrong with them, or he finds a way to sabotage, or he finds a way to shut down and close off or leave the country for few months, and she couldn't handle me being away. And what I keep showing him and providing him as a friend is that, listen, this is your own fear. This is your own stuff coming up. And I get that consciously you want to be in partnership, but subconsciously, that's actually the thing that terrifies you most. So a lot of people that say they're ready and then do the exact opposite of what someone who's ready would do is truthfully, like, that's the universe testing. And I, you know, call it woo-woo or call it whatever, you know, if you want to call it God, you want to call it, you know, energy, or you just want to call it a theory. I don't care what you call it. But I have known this to be true in my life. Whenever I say I want something and I desire something, that desire gets tested. And it's like, it's literally like somebody standing in front of me going, let's see how bad you want it. Let's see. I'm going to throw this curveball, then this curveball, then this curveball. And let's see if you actually fight for this or you run. Because it's easy to run. It's easy to run because we don't have to face off with ourselves. We don't have to go into our shadow. We don't have to go into our fears, our insecurities, our bullshit, our baggage. we can just walk away and feel like we've got a clean slate and blame it on the person and say, oh, they didn't get me, or they weren't ready, or they're not conscious enough, or whatever bullshit story we're telling ourselves, which is truthfully just another excuse for us to stay safe and stay self-contained and self-preserved.
That is so good. And it's so sneaky. It's like we don't know we're doing it.
I know.
So what are some indicators if somebody steps away that maybe they stepped away out of fear versus intentionality, other than, you know, the 3 months? Like, I think there's a lot of situations where people are dating or people are ending a relationship and they're like, was I in the right mindset to make that decision? Or was that fear? Or was it just the wrong match? Or was it my intuition? Like, how do people kind of calibrate and get home with themselves?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. It's coming into the self and giving yourself enough space to actually hear and listen. Because I don't know about you, but when I really want to avoid my shit, I get really busy and I like totally focus on work and I busy up my schedule and hang out with all my friends and try and forget all the things that are actually showing up. But what I've been in practice of, because it's an edge for me, is really creating space to be in reflection on it, like going out in nature and sitting in the sun without my phone, without a book, without a journal, and just like listening. And truthfully, within like 5 or 10 minutes, I always get my answer.
Wow.
And it's usually not a pretty one. It's usually like the answer I want to hear the least, you know, but it's usually has to do with me. It usually has to do with how I'm still hiding out, or I'm still avoiding facing off with this one thing that I thought I've dealt with. And it's usually the hardest answer and the most tedious answer in terms of what it's going to require of me. Because it always comes back to the self. It's usually never about the other person. Like, I'll say that 99.99999% of the time, it's usually not about them. It usually has to do with what you are willing to do or not willing to do, where you're willing to go or not willing to go. And that is why I said in the beginning, my relationship with Preston has been the most amazing, but also the most painful, because I've really had to face off with the parts of myself that I just thought I could sweep under the rug and nobody would figure out. You know?
Yeah, I'm thinking about a few parts of myself that I'm like, oh God, I can't imagine airing those out.
Totally. And when you're in partnership, especially if that person's done any level of work within themselves, they're going to hold you accountable to that. And that can be a scary thing. It's like, shit, I didn't want anybody to see that. And not only are you seeing it, but you're calling me on it. And I don't like that, because you're supposed to love me.
Yeah, you're supposed to think I'm everything.
You're supposed to think I'm perfect, damn it.
So when we get into letting go of this idea of perfect, I'm so curious, like, where on the spectrum a real relationship stands? Like, what do you think is real versus what do you think is the fantasy of perfect? And then what are some incompatibilities? You know what I mean? Because there's like the reality that, yeah, we need to let go of the idea that things are perfect and that things are not perfect. And then there's also somewhere along the line where it's like, hey, this is not compatible. This is not a match.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this entire concept, because, I mean, God knows this is Ashley's free coaching hour with Alexi.
I love it, girl. Take advantage. Ask all the questions. Yeah. So I think, you know, the idea of perfect that most people have, especially most single people when I talk to them, is this idea that when you find the right person, it's easy. There's not a lot of work to be done. You just get each other. There's like flow and grace, and it's just like, it just works, right? And that's kind of this idea of perfect that really screws a lot of people up, because then the moment disagreement happens, the moment life happens, then you go into self-beat up, then you go into questioning, then you go into judgment, and all of it can fall apart very quickly. Now, what I think is a more realistic view of relationship, any relationship, pulling it even further back from the romantic version of relationship and saying partner, coworker, mother, father, brother, sister, friend, any type of relationship, there's this desire to connect and to feel included and to be interdependent on one another. It's what we do biologically as a species. However, in that desire to connect, we're going to hit roadblocks. We're going to bump up against each other's unconscious agreements and rules. We're going to bump up against each other's version of right and wrong and their conditioning, and people are going to get on our nerves. You know, even if you're in love with them, like their socks on the floor are going to get annoying after a while. And it's a true story. And it's really about accepting the journey of connection. And the journey of connection is not this idyllic state where you just kind of fill in each other's gaps and sentences and your needs and values are precisely matched because you're soulmates or twin flames or whatever the trendy word is at the time. But rather it's we're connecting and we're interweaving our lives together, and we're coming together in a space of going, oh, whoa, interesting. I never noticed this about myself, and I never noticed it until it became a thing for you. And being curious and accepting and embracing of other people's quirks and idiosyncrasies and unconscious patterning and rules, and also being willing to play with your own and look at your own. And that is going to cause argument. It is going to cause power struggles. It is going to cause breakdown. And it's all how you relate to that. It's basically like how you relate to relating. If you relate to relating from the sense of like, yep, cool, I'm expecting that, you know, any flight, there's going to be a little bumpiness and a little turbulence, and that's okay. If you relate to it in that way, you're setting yourself up for success. However, if you relate to it from this idea of perfection, you're setting yourself up for failure, because the minute anything is slightly off, you're going to go into defensiveness. You're going to go into, how do I make this perfect? How do I people please? And ultimately, that's two people who are pushing aside their own needs to try and fulfill this romantic idea of love. So I think it's really like seeing how you relate to love and how you relate to connection and relating in general. And then recognizing that if you've done the work in relating, and yes, there are so many tools for it, like there's so much work around relationships, and there's so much work around how do you relate to somebody and speak their language and speak to their listening. How do you even listen? Most people don't even know how to listen. Yeah. Communicate. You know, people always say, oh, relationships are all about communication, but truthfully, it's all about listening. And we can't communicate until we listen first. So there's all these little like tools and tricks and hacks. But what's interesting is one of the mentors that Preston and I have trained and studied with, which is the Gottman Institute. They're incredible. They've done, 35 plus years of research on love. And they literally hook couples up to all these like heart monitors, and they're like measuring the acid in their urine and all sorts of stuff. And they're testing how we physically respond to love and how we physically respond to arguments and all these things. And they actually, out of all their testing in almost 40 years, 4 decades, the couples that have remained together the longest argue quite a bit. Huh. And it's so fascinating, which for me was like, what? Are you serious? Because you would think that you would come to terms with like, oh, this is just this person and it's okay, and I'm just going to like turn the other cheek. But truthfully, because they get that in relationship, you're fighting for connectedness, but you're also fighting for independence. And couples that remain attracted to one another remain attracted because there's still a strong sense of independence. There's still a strong sense of the individual. And in relationships that tend to dissipate, the individuals have totally enmeshed and totally lost who they were and basically gotten rid of their own lives in order to please and appease the other person. And that is just not sexy after a while.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The past few guys that I have dated in some way, they had talked about exes and how their exes didn't have a community or friends around them, and that was a high stress for them. And I'm also curious with incompatibilities when we're looking at the idea of perfect. It's like, first of all, where is it too much fighting early on? Where is it that it's too difficult early on? Because I get the idea that maybe it's not going to be total roses. But at what point do you look at a relationship and say, you guys just are not a match. You're not getting along.
Yeah, I think it's really, because again, this is gray, right? So there's no black and white answer because everybody's different. Every relationship is like a fingerprint. Yep. Now, I like to look at it with my clients and look at it in the sense of going, okay, have you seen how this person shows up to arguments? Do they show up committed? Do they show up willing? do they show up fighting for the relationship versus fighting for themselves and their, self-preservation? If you see that, there's still potential. There's still a total possibility of, compatible love. Because the truth is nobody is actually really compatible for each other. It is a series of making concessions and coming to agreements about disagreements and working your way into somebody's patterning. And, Preston and I, from the outset, if you met us in the beginning, most people would say we were completely incompatible. Like, we were two totally different people in so many ways. We look at life with a completely different worldview. We are very different in how we approach people in social situations. We're very different in how we approach work. Like, just fundamentally very different. Grew up with very different parents, very different ways of acknowledging and all the things, just very different. However, there was this pull towards each other. And honestly, the incompatibilities were a part of my reservation of taking 30 days of really kind of like having my hand out and keeping him at a distance, because he didn't make sense to me. I was like, this is not my type of person. I'm used to dating this type of person. And in the past, those relationships tended to work out pretty well until they didn't, right? For whatever reason. But because of his willingness and his commitment to extraordinary love, and I'll just say it's his commitment to living an extraordinary life, because of that commitment, and I saw it so clearly, it was there before he met me, and I had that commitment for myself, I knew that we could make it work. We could find ways to come together and appreciate the differences and celebrate the differences. And truthfully, our differences of what somebody could have looked at and been like, holy shit, that's like a disaster waiting to happen, have expanded us both individually so much, because usually we wouldn't have kept somebody like each other around, because we're just so different in so many ways that it just would have been like a total identity shift and a total identity shock for us to keep somebody like the other person around. But we're like, hey, let's get married instead and see what that's at.
Fuck it. Let's commit for life.
Let's just like go all in, but that's the type of person both of us are. Like, even in our vows to each other, we vowed to ourselves, like our vow was a commitment to being our fullest expression and our fullest authentic version of ourselves, and being committed to the work that it takes to be that. And in that, we'll be committed to the relationship because the other person supports that and supports that expansion of the self.
Wow, that is amazing and so inspiring. And it reminds me, it's, my mom, I came home recently and she's like, who are you dating? And I told her, I'm like, he's nothing like the other types. And she's like, great. That's good.
Does she think that's a good thing?
She does. She's like, the other ones aren't working. I'm like, all right, fair enough. I know. And they all kind of look alike, which is creepy. So this one's from a different island. But as far as, some steps so first letting go of idea of perfect, but another step you talked to me about earlier was responsible communication. And I find this super interesting because, as you said earlier, it's easy when you know other people's weaknesses to manipulate the communication because you know where they're weak and go into blame or making people wrong and not having to look at yourself. So what does it mean? What is responsible communication for everybody listening?
Yeah, so truthfully, it's listening first. And I don't know about you, but I was really great at, while somebody was talking, like having my response ready to go in my brain and being like, ooh, I'm going to say this and then I'll say that, and not actually listening to what the person in front of me is saying. And it took me a while to develop listening and to develop the skill of actually sitting with and letting it sink in and then asking myself, do I understand? And then posing it back to the person and say, so I just want to be clear. What I'm understanding you're saying is this. Is that correct? Is there anything else I'm missing? I'm actually curious about this one little bit, and I'm feeling like there's a little blank space between this idea and that idea. Could you connect that for me? And leaning into the conversation, asking more questions, making sure I'm clear on where the other person is feeling or what needs are not being met or all of those things. that is responsible communication in the fact of taking responsibility first for what is being said. And then once you've got clarity on your listening, coming back not with a, rebuttal of saying like, oh, well, here's why I did that because you're doing X, Y, and Z, but going, okay, what is my commitment here? What's my intention here in this moment, in this relationship? And if, usually the question should answer something like, oh, well, my commitment is to be in a loving partnership and to expand myself and each other together and to play team. So if that is truthfully the answer, then my follow-up to whatever my partner is saying should be, how can I meet that for you? Is there a way that I can shift what I'm doing or shift my behavior? Because I can't see myself, as much as I'd love to say I'm totally aware of all of my patterns and all my stuff. Like I can't see myself. That's why we hire coaches. That's why athletes, the best athletes in the world, have coaches so they can get feedback that's objective because we can't see ourselves, right? So my partner has a better view of me than I do. It doesn't mean it's always correct or true or law or absolute, but it's their perspective and it's their experience of me. And if I'm committed to the partnership expanding, I'm also then committed to making this experience of us together more effective for both of us. So my follow-up should be, great, how can I make this more effective for you? I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear any ideas or requests that you have. And that's instantly a game changer from the way that 90% of people speak in argument is, you're doing this, pointing the finger, then the other person, the minute the finger's pointed at them, their hands go up and in defense, and they say, well, I'm only doing that because you're doing, then their hand goes out. And it's literally a ping pong match of blame and defense, blame and defense.
Sounds like a great time.
Yeah, a really good time if you want like 3 days of not sleeping and tears and arguments and all the things.
Well,
hardcore.
One thing that I'm fascinated by is when you said you were working, the two of you at Gottman Institute, I know that he has the 4 horsemen.
Yes.
And I would love if you could talk a little bit about that because I think that relates a bit to communication, yeah?
It does. Like really, they kind of separate the 4 horsemen and communication, but the way that he really takes it is these are the things that are cataclysmic to a relationship. Like when they've studied all these couples and all of the people who stayed together and all of the people who divorced, he legit found that it is the same things across the board that come up for couples. And the 4 horsemen are criticism. And this is a really big one because a lot of people feel like they're not criticizing. They're like, oh no, I'm just saying what's bothering me. But it comes out as a criticism where it's like something is genuinely wrong with you as a person versus a complaint. Like, hey, it really frustrates me when socks are on the floor because I like a clean environment and I work from home. And it's really hard for me to focus if there's stuff all over the place versus you're messy and you're a slob.
Okay,
so criticism is making it like the person's wrong. There's something fundamentally wrong with a person. They're messy, they're a slob, they're unfair, they're a know-it-all, they're an asshole, just making the person wrong versus talking about the situation, which is a complaint. Contempt, which is the second horseman, is this kind of like, the way I like to phrase it is like, I'm better than you and I look down on you and I can't believe that you don't see it the way I see it, which is obviously the right way.
Wow.
And contempt happens quite a bit. Like in their studies at the Gottman Institute, they really kind of figured out that long-term relationships that lack passion are deep in contempt. Deep in contempt, where one person thinks they're superior to the other and the other person can never match up to the level that they think they're supposed to be on. So passion is completely dissolved because you can't feel sexy, A, when somebody's looking down at you, and B, you don't feel sexy when somebody's constantly trying to like impress you and do all these things. You're like, God, that's not attractive. Stop being so like needy and desperate, right? So contempt is huge when people lack passion.
I totally see that. And it's disrespect. It's like a lack of respect for the other. Interesting.
Hey, U-Turners, so sorry for the quick interruption, but I want to make sure you know that this episode has been brought to you by the Career Clarity Lab, the online course to help you find your career purpose in the workforce and upgrade your confidence. So if you're ready to unlock the best career path for you and you'd like to try a free version of our Clarity course, just head on over to youturnpodcast.com/clarity. That's YOUTURN podcast.com/clarity. Now let's get back to this week's episode.
And then there's defensiveness, which is pretty clear. It's like everything, like total egos running the show, like making everything about you, just being defensive, not being able to listen to what anyone's saying. And then stonewalling, and this is more prevalent in men in their studies. Stonewalling is literally just like full on shutdown. Like you're talking to somebody and they're staring straight ahead, like earmuffs are on, they can't hear you, they're not even acknowledging that you're there. And stonewalling is truthfully just, it's a coping mechanism. It's a way that people, when they either get too fired up or they don't know how to control their emotions, Gottman calls this flooding, like when like all your defense mechanisms are coming up, fight, flight, freeze, appease, coming up big time. Instead of going there and creating chaos, somebody attempts to control the situation by completely ignoring it, which is stonewalling. So those are the four that truthfully are like the death sentence to a relationship. Now, in saying that, something I love about Gottman says, if you've got the four horsemen or even one of them, it doesn't mean the relationship's dead. It just means that you guys really need to get intentional and get to work on working around these horsemen and creating a new possibility for that.
That's so fascinating. And I mean, I was kind of thinking, if there's contempt, like I have a few girlfriends, we have a few girlfriends where they were in a relationship and I think there's also a dynamic where there's a lot of powerful women in our group. And, I've noticed where there's a couple of relationships where they are stronger, they feel stronger than their partner because they're making the money or they're facing the world or they're the influencer. And as a result, they stop respecting their partner and seeing them as powerful or sexy. And so I'm really curious, like, what are your thoughts on how to be a powerful woman? And what are they doomed if you're the money-making, hustling woman and your partner isn't as strong as you in their career or in their identity?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And honestly, it's like, that's been such a deep part of my own journey is figuring out the answer to that. Because I'm total type A. I'm totally used to being in control, totally used to running the show. And in relationship with another type A, I mean, Preston, he's very type A. He's like used to running the show, used to being the star, all the things. That was our biggest issue in the beginning of our relationship, was like the power struggle, like the dynamic of neither of us are backing down on who we are, but how do we relate to each other and respect one another without making the other person wrong for who they are and who we deem them not to be. And honestly, for me, it's been this beautiful recognition that, because again, we work totally different. I work very systematically and I architect into systems and building, and I'm on time and I'm organized, and he's very creative and all over the place and blah, blah, blah. And I made him wrong for that for so many months into even like the first year of our relationship, like, because we were in business together and I was sitting here going, shit, I feel like I'm doing all the work and you're just over here visioning and blah, blah, blah. But truthfully, I wasn't acknowledging all the work he was doing and all the magic that he was bringing to the table, and how much of the way he worked was actually things that I could actually really take on and find extremely useful and effective for my way of working with or without our business together. And I think that's truthfully what it is. If you're in disrespect of your partner or contempt, or if you're looking down on them, you're actually just changing your focus, because when we're in a new relationship, we're totally focused on all the things that work for us. We're like, this person's amazing. Like every red flag could be up and we're just like ignoring the red flags. Like,
wearing rose-colored glasses, can't even see the red.
Exactly. You're like, I don't even know. Is that what that was? A red flag? Oh my God. I thought that was just someone waving something at me. So weird. And we just completely ignore all the things that are blaringly obvious. But our reticular activating system wants to make this person the person and wants to make it work. So we focus on the things that do work about this person. Now, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months in, a year in, our focus tends to shift a bit, especially if we've moved in with our partner or we've inevitably spent more time with them. We now know more about them. And when you know more, your focus expands because you're like, oh, interesting. I didn't see that before. I didn't know that that's how you are around, cleaning or whatever. And truthfully, in long-term partnership, to make it work, you've got to be willing to intentionally adjust your focus because it is so easy, like beyond easy, to find and focus on all the things that aren't working, to find all the ways that your partner's annoying, to find all the ways that they're not showing up, that they're not powerful, that they're not earning, that they're not doing. However, it's just as easy to find what is working. However, it takes more intentionality. So that's been my greatest thing is like when I find myself picking my partner apart, I instantly go, hold on, find at least 10 more ways that he is showing up. Find at least 10 more ways that he is being phenomenal in this particular domain that I want to tear him apart in right now. And acknowledge that first before I go into picking apart how he's not. Let me talk about how he is. And honestly, that's been a game changer in communicating is, P and I have both worked to the point where we've recognized that in order to really hear your partner, a lot of times we need to be acknowledged first for all the things that we're doing that we feel aren't getting acknowledged. And so if you come to, let's say you and I are in a relationship and I want to bring some feedback to you, it'd be really powerful for me to go, hey, Ash, in our friendship, I see how much effort you make. I see you reaching out. I see how you're always inviting me to things and it's so amazing. And I love that. And I just really want to appreciate you and acknowledge you for that. There's a part where I feel that there's something missing for me. I want to work on that with you. I'd really love to get behind that and underneath that. Could we talk about that? And now all of a sudden you're instantly wanting to play a team with me because I've acknowledged and appreciated you for how you have versus coming to you and being like, hey, Ash, it's really fucked up how you don't.
Well, the way you did that, I was so in, I was just I almost believe that we did have this issue just right now.
Yeah, you're like,
so
what are we going to talk about? Yeah, okay, I'm in. Let's do this.
Oh my God. I forget all of your past careers where you have all of this experience in the entertainment space. I'm such an actress, what you just did there.
I actually think I'm a terrible actress, so thank you. I will receive that.
I would be the worst too. I can't believe I was almost a spy for a career. I would have just outed everyone on my face, such a horrible liar.
I love that that's your past story. That makes me so happy.
Such a random. Okay, well, so I'm also curious when it comes to responsible communication. You kind of picked up on something which I think reminds me of Myers-Briggs. So I know the last letter of Myers-Briggs, J or P. I know the J's are very able to lead with organization, showing up on time, and the P's, depending on how much of a P, they are the ones that go with the flow, are late, whatever. Is that an incompatibility? Because you'd mentioned that with Preston, or how do you navigate that? I mean, where is the middle ground and how do you communicate? Because I think there's a lot of friendships as well where you have that friend that's always late.
Yeah, no, that's such a big thing. And, it's interesting because I love personality typing and testing and human design. I love that stuff. And I have a love-hate relationship with it because it's also, it very much puts us in a box and says that we're this particular type of person when I believe that we have possibility to really move and evolve and change. And so I think we have to be careful when we typecast ourselves with these tests, which are phenomenal and give us a lot of insight into our lives. And it's not like a life sentence, so that's my caveat on that. Now, again, coming into this, I do feel like there are people who have a certain way of doing things and other people have a certain way of doing things. And that's quote unquote their way. And everyone, we all think our way is the right way. We all think our way is the best way based on results because we keep doing it, right? We think our way is oh yeah, that's just what everyone does or should do because it's obviously that's what I do, so it works. Now, in saying that, when you come into partnership, there's what Preston and I like to call unconscious agreements. And these are all the ways in which we view society, life, relationship, you name it. And there are unconscious rules about how it should be, how it should go, how women should act, how men should act in this particular scenario. Like, it's so specific, and there's so many like subdomains under relationships and the opposite sex and laundry and housework. Like, there are just so many unconscious agreements that most of us have no idea about. And when we get into a relationship, every disagreement is literally two unconscious agreements fighting to be right. So Preston and I, like, when we're in disagreement, obviously, you know, sometimes we're totally not nailing this and getting this perfect, and we need to go a bit into the ego and a bit into the victimhood and all that stuff before we come back to our senses and go, oh yeah, hold on, this is two unconscious agreements, so let's figure out what those are. Okay, well, my unconscious agreement says that you should fill in the blank. Ah, interesting. Mine says that you should fill in the blank. Okay, great. Let's create a conscious agreement together as a couple that feels good for both of us, that we can now put on our agreements list. And as partners and even like friends, you are literally creating agreements together consciously if you are in a conscious, intentional partnership. Now, most people are kind of doing this haphazardly and not actually creating these conscious agreements and then checking in on it. Like, so Preston and I will create a new conscious agreement after an argument and go, well, let's check in like a couple weeks and see how we feel on it. And we'll try it out. We'll try it on. We'll say, you know what, actually that felt really weird for me, and I'm actually not aligned with that at all. I tried it on, but would you be willing to shift this particular aspect of it? And you're literally co-creating a new paradigm of what relationship means to be with this particular person. And this is why I go back to that whole incompatibility thing, because truthfully, we're all incompatible. Like, we're all completely doing our own thing, thinking it's the right thing. And then we get into partnership with someone and go, oh, well, my thing doesn't match with your thing. That means we're not going to work. And the truth is, well, do you want it to work? Because you can make it work, but you've got to be willing to play team and co-create what relationship means together. And it's going to change with every relationship. It's literally a new paradigm. You're creating a new map, a new territory for what relationship means with this particular person, doing it together at this particular time, with wherever you're at on your own personal journey. Like, this is so unique. And it's all a matter of how much you're willing to play team versus how much you're like, fuck this, I'm out. Like, this is too much work.
I love this. It's so fascinating. And I know you talked about the third step after communication being doing the inner work, knowing your patterns before that person showed up. Yeah. And obviously it's so hard to read the label when you're inside the jar.
Oh, yeah.
So how do people who are listening right now, who maybe haven't fully woken up to their patterns, how do they start to kind of realize, who was I before I showed up in this relationship? What things am I bringing with me that I might not be totally aware of?
Yeah, great question. I reassure anybody who like hasn't done the work. Like, I have a friend who just got into a relationship and she's like, oh my God, I feel like there's so much work I need to do first. And I'm like, trust me, the work will show itself. Like, if you're in partnership, the work will reveal itself, and you will have plenty of opportunity to look at, okay, here's something that came up. Literally every time something comes up, Preston and I go, okay, how did we bring this exact thing or something very similar to it? How did we bring this in? How did this show up in my last relationship? Like, how is this a pattern for me that I keep playing out? Because the truth is, the lesson will keep showing up until it's actually taken on and embodied and shifted. So really, every opportunity you have is every fight you get into, every disagreement, every frustration you have, every time you want to judge your partner, pick them apart. Literally, the inner work then goes, okay, instead of making this about them, I'm going to go inside first. I'm going to track this back to maybe the relationships I've had for the last 10 years, to maybe my mom or my dad, or to that one time when I was embarrassed by my crush in, 6th grade and I vowed to never be vulnerable again. If we can trace the patterning back, we can recognize, this person didn't bring this in. It's not because of this person. This person just happened to activate something that was lying dormant in me for a long time. And truthfully, that is the gift of relationship, whether it's, again, romantic or non-romantic. Relationship is not just comforting and beautiful and fun and expansive to be with somebody, but it's revealing, and it will show you the darkest parts of yourself. It will show you your deepest insecurities. It will reveal your shame. It will highlight the areas that you've been ignoring for too long. And this is unfortunately why divorce and separation is so prevalent in our world today, because so many people are unwilling to be with that part of relationship. They just want the highlight reel and the good stuff and the comfort and the love and the highs and the love letters and the Valentine's days and all that. But what they don't get is true love encompasses all of it. And it requires all of it to actually truly love and be in love. One must be willing to love themselves enough to heal themselves if they haven't.
And you know what this makes me think of is people getting back together, because sometimes we heal things that weren't working and they're circumstantial. Do you have any feedback for anybody listening that maybe has somebody from their past that maybe they were in a situation where they both weren't in a consciousness to be able to endure the relationship? And maybe something has shifted or they've shifted. How do you kind of do that gauge of circling back to something?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it requires a conversation, and that conversation can literally be one-sided from you, where it's just taking ownership of all the ways in which you blamed, in which you projected, in which you didn't take responsibility, in which you didn't do the inner work. And if you can come to that person and just say, hey, like, I would just really love to clear this with you and say that I've done a lot of soul searching around this and recognize I was really in my shit and really in my ego, and I wanted to be right and I wanted it to be perfect. And I also wasn't willing to bend, and I wasn't willing to truly give my heart and show up and be vulnerable. And I recognize that now. And I don't know what that means for us. It may not mean anything, but I just want you to know that I see that. And I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to give that to you at that time. I just wasn't ready for it.
So good. Okay.
Yeah. And it may open something up and it may not, but at the very least you can get that closure and know that you've shown up in integrity and given somebody that peace of mind. Because you know what? Sometimes a lot of people are suffering. They won't let on that they're suffering, but they're suffering because of how something ended or how a past relationship was. And really, just with our ownership, we can end a lot of people's suffering.
I love that. And I'm also curious, what is that fine line for a couple of living in the past and clearing the air? You know?
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, because so many people, we were talking about this before, so many people process and process and process and process. And then the relationship becomes a series of processing and a series of drudging up the past and a series of just going in and going into the work. And while that's great, and I celebrate that, because a lot of people could probably do that more often than they currently are. I think there's people who are addicted to processing and addicted to suffering and addicted to looking for something. And the truth is if you're looking for it, you'll find it. I was having a conversation with a friend today who's kind of new to LA, and she's like, I want to do some work and I want to jump in. And she's done a lot of stuff already. And I'm like, well, the truth is what answers do you want to find? Because you could do 1,000 different processes and trainings, but what kind of answers do you want? Because, if you want to find mom and dad stuff, you can do this type of training. If you want to find your sexuality, do this type of training. It's what are you looking for? And I think, and this leads me really to the fifth step, which we can come back to the fourth, but the fifth step is play. I think a lot of couples get into the work so much, and they'll get into maybe therapy or even have relationship coaches that are constantly having them work on the things and not having them really go back to fun and joy and play and dating and sex and connection and, affection and all the things that really solidify intimate love relationships. Because, again, the sex and all that is usually great in the beginning, and then it dies off because we get to know each other more. And because we've gone from insecurity of, I don't know how this is going to turn out, like, I don't know how this person really feels about me. Are they going to call me? Are they going to not? That's exciting. And the body loves that excitement, but the brain can't handle it. The brain is like, I need security.
Yes.
So what happens is
I can't handle that, what you're talking about.
Legit. And a lot of people can, especially women. Like we're kind of built to look for security, right? But the excitement, the insecurity is what like drives us sexually. It feels exciting and we lean in and we want more. And there's just that spaciousness feels really exciting because we don't know. So then our brain goes, well, fuck this. Like we need security. So let's go at everything we can to make this as secure as possible. So we create pet names. We create like date nights. So it's like, oh yeah, Thursday night is when I hang out with so-and-so. We literally create all these little ways that we can feel more secure. And eventually that turns into moving in together or getting married or saying we're committed to each other, or whatever it might be. And then that security feels really good for a little bit. And then it's that same security that literally kills off the passion. And passion, you know, for Preston and I, we've recognized that play and passion are so closely related. And when I say play, I don't just mean together. I mean play separately, like have your friends, have your village, have your people that you go to, have your life. Like, don't stop doing the things you love to do before you met this person. Like, do them more. Find new things that excite you, because that's bringing new energy back into the relationship. It's bringing a new sense of curiosity and fun and aliveness. And, oh, wow, I thought I knew this person, but this is really interesting. I didn't know this about you. I didn't know that you think this way, or that you loved African dance, or whatever it might be. And that keeps the excitement really generating and circulating in the relationship. So that's huge.
Love that. And I love the phrase you used in number 4. So everybody who's following, number 1 was letting go of perfect. Number 2 was responsible communication. Number 3 was doing the inner work. And then number 4, before we skip to 5, which was play, was emotional bank accounts, deposits, and withdrawals. I think this is so cool because it feels like a visual. So I'm curious to understand.
I'm such a visual person.
Yeah, me and you both, sister. I'm like, okay, how do people check in their relationships, even in their friendships? I feel like emotional bank accounts. What does that mean to you? How do people start to use that concept in their life?
Yeah. So for me, it's a clear conversation. So, this actually started with a dear friend of mine, who we had very different ways of depositing and withdrawing in friendship. And I felt for a really long time with this particular friend that like she was mad at me, or like there was like some resentment, or there was conversation maybe happening with other friends in our circle. And I said, hey, like, can we talk about the 9 gazillion pound gorilla in the room? Like, I feel like something's off. And she said, yeah, something is off. Like, I feel like you're just not making an effort. And I feel like, you know, I'm reaching out and I'm texting you and you don't text back and you never call me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I wish we would have had this conversation sooner, because that's not the way I express. That's not the way I deposit, you know. And you could call this love languages, but it's really so much more specific and deeper than that. It's really about finding out what specific activities, what specific ways of speaking, what specific ways of relating to this person is considered a deposit, where it makes them feel more alive, it makes them feel more connected to you, it makes their cup feel full. And then what specific ways are withdrawals, where it's like, oh, you did that thing and like shut down. Oh, you did that thing, separate from you. Oh, you did that thing, I'm literally going to like turn the volume down on my love because I'm withholding. And it's so specific. And so, you know, with my friend, this particular person, we wrote a list of ways of being and how we work together that were deposits for ourselves and withdrawals. And so then I had my list, and I knew exactly how this person needed to be loved. And I knew exactly what activities were like cha-ching, 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 making her account go all the way up. And I knew which ones were like immediate withdrawals. And I did the same with Preston. And it is so amazing to know specifically what your partner needs to feel full and abundant and overflowing. And that way it's about meeting their needs, the specific way that they need them to be met.
So good. And I feel like there's boundaries, right? Like maybe the way both of your bank accounts work it's not worth it for you. Like, oh, this person
100%.
needs these things and I'm not willing to do them, which is kind of what you talked about, where it's not about compatibility. It's what you're willing to do and not do. Yeah.
100%. And that also goes back to, again, like there's a lot of gray area with all of this, but with deposits and withdrawals and with any type of like conscious agreements, you've also got to ask yourself, and this comes back to responsible communication, responsible relating. You've got to ask yourself, like, am I requesting this out of a wound? Am I requesting this out of a deep insecurity? Am I requesting this out of an unwillingness to do the work on this myself and expecting my partner to do this work for me? And that is a big thing that I think a lot of people miss in doing relationship work is we say, oh, well, I need you to, give me words of affirmation all the time or else I don't feel loved. And it's like, okay, but in what ways are you not affirming yourself? In what ways are you not having conversations with yourself and saying, you've got this, you're doing a great job? In what ways are you not celebrating where you're at and you're expecting the world to do it for you? And I think that, again, comes back to that responsibility portion where we've really got to look at ourselves first and go, you know what, that's actually my job. Let me start on that. I would love if you could like chime in every now and again and support me on that journey, but that's actually my job. Let me do that.
So good. Alexi, you're everything. And I feel like such a treat for everybody listening, because I think a lot of people do have this belief that there's compatibility or not. And I think one of the things that I find when you come into a room is that there's air. Like you just have good energy, good vibes, air around you. And I think that this concept that you can create whatever you want, and it's really just comes down to what you're willing to do and what you're willing not to do. And I actually did an episode with Kylie Macbeth, weeks ago on when you're losing yourself in a relationship.
Oh, nice. I got to listen to that.
Yeah, it's so good. It is such a good episode. I think I cried in the post-show conversation because I was like, I think I've lost myself. I don't even remember, but where can everybody find you? Because I know you have Soul School, your monthly membership, and so many opportunities for people to learn from you in so many ways, not just in love, but in business and in life.
Yeah, you can find everything on alexipanos.com. And if you're like social media, like I am, Instagram is my jam. So find me on Instagram at Alexi Panos. Always posting content there, doing video shares pretty much every day and sharing a little bit of my life with my man and my little man, Kingston, my son, on Insta stories. So check all that out.
Oh my gosh. And another one on the way, pregnant as fuck.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's so many things. And it's like I said, I feel like Preston and I just went from zero to adulting really quickly. And we're also talking about getting a dog, which I feel like is the extra adulting. It's like adulting on top.
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh. So fun. And you guys got your new house. It's just going.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
You can't stop us.
Yeah. Oh, well, maybe if you get a dog, it just means another housewarming where you guys both feed me and have to deal with all of my vibes in there.
Yeah. So down for that.
Well, thank you for being here with me. I love you. I so love you. I appreciate you.
Yes. And thank you for like having this amazing conversation. I want to acknowledge you for your listening. Your listening is phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. I am going to receive that. Hey there, it's Ash here, and I am just unpacking this episode with Alexi Panos, who is obviously so amazing. I'm sure you got so many takeaways as I did from that episode. Her relationship with Preston Smiles is really beautiful, and I've watched it many times, just being out with them, being together with them, and I think that they've really gone deep in working on themselves and having the resources to support other couples in the joy that they can have. And one of the things that really sat with me that Alexi talked about was about compatibility and how she doesn't necessarily believe in compatibility. She believes that there's just simply awareness of what we're willing to do and what we're not willing to do. And I love that perspective because a lot of the times we think about compatibility like this fixed thing, like either it's a match or it's not, when really it's who's willing to do what. And that's what relationships come down to, is what are you willing to do for the other person? What are you willing to do for the relationship? And being clear on who you are and where you're not willing to give more, I think is really key. So found that really profound. But one thought that I've been having a lot lately that I'm really excited to share with you on the podcast today is about the concept of moving forward. So I have a lot of friends who are married, some who are really happy about it, others who are not. And what I'm finding is that we live in a world where society sees a certain set of action plans and action steps as what it looks like to be moving forward. So society looks at certain things and says, okay, this is what it looks like when this person is moving forward. And what I'm learning is that, ultimately, we are having a lot of misperceptions about what it means to move forward. Because, for example, let's take the friend who's unhappily married and let's take the other person who's single. The unhappily married person looks like they're moving forward in society. They're married, maybe they're pregnant and having a kid, they're in forward motion in their relationship. But if they're not happy and they're not with the right person for them, or they're not willing to do what it takes to be in that relationship because it's asking too much of them to sacrifice themselves, they're actually moving backwards by getting married, getting pregnant, and doing all these things, because ultimately who you are always wins. What you want in the world, what's true for you, it's always going to come out. It's just a matter of, is it going to come out this year or is it going to come out next year? But what you want and who you are is always going to come out, because who you are always does win. It's just inevitable. And what I'm finding is that a lot of people will suppress that voice inside of them that tells them something's not right for them. And then they'll end up in a relationship or a situation that doesn't feel like a match for them. And the truth will come out. And it's a matter of, do you want to rip the Band-Aid off on the truth and feel it all this year? Or do you want to rip and cry right now? Or do you want to rip the Band-Aid off on the truth and feel it all next year and cry right then? Ultimately, who you are and what you want and what's true in your heart is always going to come out. So it's just a matter of how long you want to prolong the anxiety and the pain of denying it. And so what I've found is that my friends who aren't happily married, they look like they're moving forward on so many levels. Some of them are even saying we're going to have a baby, even though privately they're telling me they're really unhappy and they don't want to, they feel like they're giving up too much of themselves to be with that person. And if that's the case, eventually they're going to have to listen to themselves. That might take a year or two of their time. Then they're going to have to ask for the divorce and process the paperwork, which is going to take another year of their time and argument. And then they're going to have to deal with the baby and custody and restarting their life and healing, which maybe is another year of their time. Maybe not. Maybe it would be shorter. But the point being that it looks like they're moving forward when in reality, the single person who's available for the right person, who's out there dating, who hasn't found love yet, they're moving forward because they're actually sifting through real partners. And the more real they are with themselves about what they're looking for, and the more honest they are with themselves about what's a yes and a no for them, the more truthful they are when they're in the face of somebody good, but what they really want is somebody great for them, the closer they are to what really looks like forward motion. I think about this at least once a week, because in some areas of my life, I'm not where I want to be. And I know that if you're listening, there's probably some areas of your life that you're not where you want to be. And it can be very tempting to look at some people, even if they're unhappy, and think to themselves, they're moving forward. Why aren't I? But really, it's like, if they're not moving in the right direction for them truly, they're going to have to take some steps back to then move forward again. And so I would say, honor yourself, honor where you are. Listen to that voice inside of you that already knows the truth. If you're in a marriage right now that isn't a fit for you, if you are trying to move forward because it looks like what society would say is moving forward, when really you're avoiding the truth and you're going to probably have to eventually listen to it, that could be in your career. I know a lot of people in the Career Clarity Lab course that I host, and there's a free version of that at youturnpodcast.com/clarity. So YOUTURN podcast.com/clarity. So I know a lot of people in that course who they thought they were moving forward in their career, but really it wasn't the right career path for them. And the truth was always going to win. Eventually they were going to have to face the music and realize they need to take some step back and figure out who they are, whether they hired me for privately coaching them or joined my course, or just quit their job and took some time off. Whatever it was they did to get closer to what's true. I think it's so tempting to move forward in society or do what society looks like moving forward, when in actuality, you're feeling totally disconnected inside, and you're going to have to eventually listen to that. So, and in those cases, when there's that career woman who's, at the top of the chain, but really doesn't like what she's doing. And then there's the other person who, quit their job and is sitting in their house figuring out what they want to do, or hiring a coach like me. It's like they're actually moving forward because they're in the truth of what is. And so what I want to leave you with is this: what do you know that you wish you didn't know that is true? And then my invitation for you is to see things as they are, not what you want them to be, not what's worse than what they are. You don't need to see them as worse than they are, but as what they are. and take action on that. Take action on that so you can actually be moving forward in your life. So with that said, some truth bombs. I hope you share this episode with a friend who really needed it. I think that this love episode was really helpful, or even just this post-episode conversation. Maybe there's somebody in your life who needs this. It means the world to me that you're writing reviews on U-Turn Podcast on iTunes. The written reviews just light me up. They keep me going. They really inspire me. And it also just excites me to know that you're sharing this with people who really need it, because U-Turn Podcast isn't something that I'm getting sponsors for. I'm not monetizing it. Sure, I share my private coaching. I share my courses and what I'm up to. But ultimately, this has just been a passion project and not a business project. So thank you so much for sharing and spreading the word. I love you. I thank you. And most of all, I thank you for doing the work on yourself, for being somebody that lights up the world by having a clear windshield and by being the best you that you can be. So forgive yourself for buying into any beliefs that you're not moving forward if you're feeling really stuck right now. Because if you're listening to the truth of where you are, that's forward motion. The truth is forward. Sending you lots of love. Thanks for listening. This is Ashley Stahl signing off.
Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the U-Turn Podcast. We keep really detailed show notes at uturnpodcast.com. So if our guest mentioned a book or a resource that you're interested in, you'll be able to find that there. In the meantime, if you were inspired by this episode, if it made an impact in your life, we would be so grateful if you subscribed and posted a review for us on iTunes. Rumor has it on the street, the more reviews we get, the more subscribes we get, the more we can grow and get our impact out there in the world. In the meantime, I'd love to hear from you at Ashley Stahl on Instagram. I'm so grateful for connecting, and I look forward to next week's episode.